July 16th, 1945, 5:49 a.m. In New Mexico's empty desert, the world met Trinity, the first plutonium nuclear explosion after 3 years of heavy development. It was developed by scientists working on a government-sponsored underground project. Project facilities were spread over 14 states. The facilities used for research and development of the bomb were disguised in universities as well as small towns. The project cost an equivalent of 30 billion current US dollars and required hundreds of thousands of workers, making it the biggest secret project in American history. It influenced future foreign relations and had an immediate and long-lasting effect on the surrounding environment.
As the United States entered World War II in 1941, Germany was heavily invested in advancing their nuclear capabilities. The Allied powers feared that Germany would develop an atomic weapon that they could use to expand their control and power over the world. Enrico Fermi, an Italian immigrant, and Albert Einstein, a German immigrant, were two of the leading scientists that got the Manhattan Project to begin. Fermi conferenced with the United States government and stressed the importance of creating an atomic weapon. But it was Einstein's letter to President Roosevelt, which outlined a need for developing a nuclear bomb, that persuaded Roosevelt to start the United States' research on atomic science. The United States Army began their nuclear development, codenamed the Manhattan Project, in several universities and founded its headquarters in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They began construction on the atomic bomb in Los Alamos, New Mexico. It was very secluded from society, so they could work in secrecy. Robert Oppenheimer was the head of the Los Alamos Project. The workers there built a covert laboratory. The University of California at Berkeley took over the project in 1943, and the project then significantly jumped from a few hundred employees to well over 6,000 by 1945. The researchers over these years looked into creating a plutonium atomic bomb. The Trinity, which was then called the Gadget, was based on an implosion bomb model. In an implosion bomb, a small plutonium core would be surrounded with explosives. The compression that is created releases the atomic power. Once development was complete, they tested Trinity at the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. When the bomb went off, it sent a shockwave that was felt over 100 miles away. The mushroom cloud that was created rose to a height of 6.5 miles. A Navy pilot that saw the explosion said, "My first impression was like the sun was coming up in the south. It was so bright it lit up the cockpit of the plane." He radioed Albuquerque, but the only response he got was, "Don't fly south." Once they successfully tested the Trinity, they were able to deploy bombs to use against Japan, which forced Japan's surrender, ending the war.
The Trinity explosion created a crater that was 1/2 mile wide, and it produced heat equivalent to 4 times that of the sun, which killed every living creature within a mile radius. The bomb released gamma radiation, which harmed all species in the area for years after the explosion occurred. Radioactive particles were spread 120 miles away from the test site and were found 42 inches below the surface at ground zero. The radiation at the test site was neutron-induced, which would continue to go down deeper into the soil until they exhausted their energy. The area would basically be radioactive forever. The people of New Mexico were internally exposed to radiation, and they breathed in fallout and absorbed it through intact or injured skin. The main source of internal radiation for the people of New Mexico was contamination of their food and water. The radiation got into the rainwater, which the people of New Mexico collected and drank. The vegetation was also contaminated when fallout was deposited on the plants or on the soil they grew in. Animals grazing on grass affected by the radioactive particles also produced contaminated milk and meat, which in turn affected the humans who consumed it. They were internally exposed to months of radiation, which accumulated and stored in the body's tissues and organs, which may have increased the chances of cancer and birth defects. They were also externally exposed to radiation from gamma rays emitted by particles on the ground. The more time a person spent outside, the more external radiation they received. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission states that people should not receive more than 2 millirems of radiation an hour from an external source. After the Trinity Test, the exposure rates were more than 10,000 times that. Furthermore, many creatures as well as plants and soil as far as 100 miles northeast of the drop zone were found to have traces of unfissioned plutonium in them. This, in turn, could cause many genetic alterations in the exposed species. Today, if you visit the test site for an hour, your whole body will be exposed to 1/2 to 1 millirem of radiation. Because the government wanted to keep the Trinity bomb a secret from the public, local residents in New Mexico weren't told about the bomb. The Army had created a list of local residents so they could check up on them. Every 6 months, they would test the people who lived closest to Ground Zero. The people being tested never knew why. At the time of the Trinity Test, scientists knew very little about the long-term effects from high radiation exposure. Now we know that radiation exposure increases the risks of cancer, particularly endocrine cancers like thyroid cancers, and disrupts reproductive cells, increasing the risks of genetic mutations and birth defects.
Albert Einstein's letter that went to Franklin Roosevelt detailed the Nazis' efforts to purify uranium, which could be used to build an atomic bomb. The fear that Germany would develop an atomic bomb led President Roosevelt to fund the Manhattan Project. Britain also began to assist the United States in their nuclear development, however, the Soviet Union wasn't informed. Their differing political ideology made us not wish to share information about the development with them. Furthermore, both President Roosevelt and President Truman looked to expand the democratic influence, while the Soviet Union looked to expand their communist influence. The US kept the Manhattan Project a secret from the world except for the high-ranking Canadian and British personnel. It was incredibly important for Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union to not find out about their research and development. Their primary reasons for developing the atomic bomb were to end the war with Japan and to have control over foreign policy instead of the Soviet Union having the complete power. The Soviet Union was going to assist America in fighting Japan if there wasn't a surrender within 3 months of the Potsdam Conference. America wanted to have Japan as a complete victory for them, and they didn't want to have to compromise surrender details with the Soviet Union. The US decided to use the development that they had created in the Manhattan Project to get a quick end to the war with Japan before the USSR could intervene. Atomic spies still were able to infiltrate the Manhattan Project. They illicitly gathered and gave information to the Soviet Union relating to the development of the atomic bomb. Klaus Fuchs was a notable spy that brought information to the Soviet Union to try and further their atomic project. The US was able to successfully keep their Trinity design a secret until after the development of the bomb. The Soviet Union was able to get their original blueprint of the Trinity bomb and they recreated it. They successfully detonated their first bomb on August 29, 1949. America's inability to keep the Trinity bomb's blueprint secure led to the beginning of the nuclear arms race throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The Soviet Union and America began to race to see who could build bigger and better atomic weapons. This led to future tensions between the two countries and events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Ultimately, the arms race cooled down later on, but because of America's detonation of the Trinity bomb, a tense relationship was created that frightened other countries with the fear of a nuclear war.
It became brighter and brighter and rose, and I knew that soon it will be used over Japan, and then it will not be just an experiment.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
When the world met its first atomic weapon on July 16, 1945, it resulted in many consequences both environmentally and with America's foreign relationships. The resulting aftershock of America's tension with the Soviet Union led to the arms race and the creation of thousands of atomic weapons. The Trinity bomb also had an immediate effect on the surrounding environment and the people of New Mexico. It caused a lasting effect at Ground Zero, where radiation levels are 10 times stronger than normal. It is also believed, and has supporting evidence, that the high exposure to radiation following the test led to various forms of cancer. This bomb is what pushed the world into the atomic era. America's researchers led the way for new technologies, with the consequences of taking a toll on the environment and creating tense relationships with foreign countries.